So today, I wanted to talk a little bit about the humans in the Sonic the Hedgehog franchise and how we're seeing a bit of an absence of them lately, and I wanted to talk about why they're so important to have in the series, and also why I feature them so heavily in my own Sonic the Hedgehog animated series. The reason I think they're so important is because they offer a sense of groundedness, relatability, and realism to the world that otherwise I think is lacking if you just make them all Mobians. I don't think it completely goes away because the Mobians are very similar to the humans, and so there's always going to be that relatability between them. They both have very similar feelings and emotions, and they're the same, they're just different beings, they're different creatures. But I do think it's important for them to be featured to give that sense of groundedness and relatability. We've known that the Sonic games pretty much ever since either Sonic Adventure or Sonic 1, I think it's Sonic 1, everything takes place on Earth. Pretty much everything. There's not much that doesn't take place on Earth from the beginning of the series. And I even think that saying that, oh, well, they live on this little island and they have their own country or their own state or whatever, I think that that's a mistake too. They would and should live amongst each other, and I think that creates a very interesting conflict for story, because some of the things that inspired me when I was making my story was movies like District 9, where there's like these aliens living among these humans, and I immediately thought of like, well, the Mobians would kind of be like aliens. They just showed up one day, and it's kind of Eggman's fault that they got transported there if you go with the lore of Sonic X, which was probably why there was so much hate from the humans towards Eggman from the very beginning for causing this whole conundrum to begin with. But that aside, I think there is a very interesting political aspect to the Sonic series of like, how do these aliens and these humans, two completely different beings, coexist, live amongst each other? I mean, we see that in Sonic Adventure when Amy's walking down the street with a bag of groceries and the egg carrier comes flying overhead, and I mean, that whole introduction when I first saw that just clued me in, like, oh, they live amongst the humans. They're kind of equals. They've learned to live together, probably because they showed their worth. They saved the world from Eggman many times by the time that we get to Sonic Adventure, so it sort of works. And then in Sonic Adventure 2, there's a mission where you chase down the president, and this is probably the first interaction the president is having with Sonic and his friends and the Mobians in general. And obviously at this point in the timeline, it's not exactly clear if the relationship is good or bad. I mean, Shadow kind of frames Sonic by accident because they look similar and they're both hedgehogs, and they think, oh, that was probably Sonic that stole that Chaos Emerald, when it was really not. It was Shadow, but they didn't really know too much about Shadow because he was like this hidden secret project. So once all that confusion is cleared up, they're not really after Sonic anymore. GUN has sort of befriended Sonic and Shadow and all their friends, and they're on the same team, they're on the same side. And we especially see that in the Shadow the Hedgehog game with Sonic and his friends and even Team Chaotix, and they're all working together with GUN to save the world from these aliens. It just shows how, like, when things really get tough, they came together. And the president clearly had some sort of an appreciation for Sonic and Shadow. I know it's a meme at this point with the photograph on his desk, but that's real. That's something that, like, he appreciates them for saving the world from the space colony arc crashing into it because of Gerald Robotnik's craziness. They really did save the entire planet from catastrophe. It's good to see that he appreciates that to the point where he holds them to importance, so that whenever things get heated again, he looks at that photograph and he remembers who they are and what they're capable of, and that they're on the same side. What's interesting is that the commander's like the opposite because of his misunderstanding of thinking that it was Shadow who killed Maria, when in reality it was obviously not the case. So it's always been this sort of back and forth relationship where there's like still some humans that are not on board with the Mobians, especially Shadow being like one of the most powerful, and he did have a dark history. He has done some terrible things, out of anger of losing Maria and being screwed over in the way that he was. So then the commander comes around to Shadow and they start to work together, and then they form a really great friendship. And Rouge is already working for Gun. I think she was one of the first Mobians to work for Gun. So, I mean, where she came from, I don't think we've ever really explored her origins, but she just was always a spy or agent for GUN. Then Shadow came in, and then Omega came in whenever Omega was sort of going against Eggman. They gave him a second chance. They didn't just dismantle him and try to find a way to, how do we make 1 million copies of these and make an army? They didn't do anything like that. They welcomed him into the family, and they knew that they needed as much help as they could get. So I just love that story about how the humans grew to accept the Mobians and work with them and trust them. And they grew this trust over a long time. But now it's not the commander that needs to be convinced. It's the people. It's society. Remember, these are still humans. They still go online and they have conversations and they gain followings. And if somebody says negative things about Shadow, like, oh, really? We're just going to trust this weapon and act like he's not going to go rogue or do something crazy, or, he has enough power to wipe out humanity. If he wanted to, he could. And so someone having that kind of power creates a fear. And this is where I got a little bit of inspiration from the Dark Knight trilogy and Man of Steel and Batman v Superman. And trust me, I have plenty of issues with Batman v Superman as a movie, but one aspect I did like about it that they didn't really go into detail enough with was how society did not accept Superman, someone with so much power and who's capable of so much destruction and has caused so much destruction. Of course, he didn't really have a choice. He was fighting someone with his level of power. So that was definitely an inspiration when working on my series. I grew up watching the Batman animated series, but then when I got a little older and The Dark Knight came around, I was obsessed with that movie, that whole trilogy. And what I got from it was basically that there's a lot more going on than just superheroes fighting each other. And these powerful beings, aliens, whatever you want to call them, there's more going on than the very surface level things that we see. There's a whole society that's reacting to this that begins to resent these Mobians, these aliens, because, oh my God, they're causing so much destruction. People have lost family members because of buildings being blown up and stuff like that while these powerful beings are fighting one another. And I know it's a very adult take to apply to something like Sonic, but I feel like if I don't acknowledge it when I'm writing these stories, it just feels disingenuous. It feels like I'm purposefully leaving some aspect of the world and the story out. And I really don't appreciate when stories do that. I didn't really know when I was watching The Dark Knight as a kid what I was watching. It was a political thriller, through and through. Of course, I was glued to those Heath Ledger Joker scenes. They're so well directed and so well acted and so well written. And I got inspiration from that too, but it was really, the whole thing was just very political. And I like to inject a little bit of that into my fantasy stories because it's very grounded and realistic and it pulls it in. And I think it makes it very human. Like, how would we react to all these things happening if this was really happening? There would be a huge group of people that would not approve of suddenly having to share this planet with these aliens who they just don't trust and who've caused all this destruction. And that's why that's always been an aspect of my storytelling. Of course, it's not centered around that. It's not all about that, but it is a huge background element that's always there and you feel it. At the beginning of Cybernetics, my first episode of it, Sonic and Shadow are talking about the past. They're talking about what Sonic had missed while he was gone and all the things they were dealing with and how the humans are kind of against them because of everything that's happened.
So, after it destroyed Prison Island, what happened?
Me and Scourge washed ashore. I think it was somewhere on the outskirts of Central City. After that, it was just a massive fight until we destroyed him. But the blast, it took out a couple of city blocks.
I'm guessing that's why everyone retreated to Freedom Island, right?
Yeah. Pretty much everyone who was connected to the Doomsday event were being hunted down by the humans. Even certain members of GUN weren't safe.
The space colony Ark almost crashed into the Earth yet again because of Sonic turning evil. And it's a valid question. It's like if something happens to these Mobians, they're so powerful, they can get so out of control, things can get out of hand. So there's a huge disapproval of them. Of course, there's always going to be people that say, well, if it wasn't for them, we'd all be dead. They saved our lives. And these are the people that are a little bit more logical. But at the same time, you see the other side, that, well, lives were lost. They couldn't save everybody. They'll never be able to save everybody. And as long as their presence is here and is known, clone, and there's always an Eggman around, whether it's the original or it's Eggman Nega. There's always gonna be a conflict. There's always gonna be destruction. There's always gonna be chaos. And of course, it would be way worse if the Mobians weren't here and Eggman just took over the world very easily, which he definitely would have done. He has the brains to do so. But it's always Sonic who stops him. But people lose sight of that. You know, they appreciate the hero when he first shows up on the scene, and then over time they start to resent. They start to go against the hero. I find those stories compelling. So is it going to be like this forever, where they're constantly fighting for approval from the humans? No, of course not. I think Shadow said it best at the end of Revolution when he was talking with Tails before the big fight, when he basically just said, like, we can't control what they think about us. The truth is that we've been here for quite a while now, and this planet is just as much ours as it is theirs. We've put our lives on the line to save it. We've earned the right. But we can't sit here and try to force them to think a certain way. We just have to keep doing what we do, and eventually they'll figure it out or they won't. We can't change that. And there's this acceptance that comes with that. Now, of course, they still care what humans think about them, but they realize that, like, this obsession with it of, like, oh, we're not doing so great, you know, when it comes to what they think of us. You know, I think Shadow finally understands. It makes sense that he'd be the first one to understand that this isn't such an easy thing to deal with and to grapple with. It's never going to be, oh, we saved the day and everyone loves us. It's never going to be that. So don't have these expectations that are unrealistic, and just be yourself, do what you think is right, and don't worry about what everyone thinks. You know, and that's really the message that comes through, and I hope comes through once these arcs are completed and these stories are brought to the next chapter and the next chapter. As we continue, I think it'll be a lot more clear that that whole political aspect to it sort of dies down, and that there's always going to be conflict. But that's really what Mecha Sonic wanted to do in Doomsday. He didn't just want to kill the Mobians and destroy the planet. He wanted to make them suffer. He wanted to make them lose their good standing with the humans, because he knew it was on a very fragile stilts. He knew it could be knocked over very easily. And that's why when they're on the moon and they're like seemingly having a final confrontation, he teleports all of them to Central City to have their final battle, because he knows, well, if I get destroyed, if that happens, and I blow up, I want to be doing one last final act of what he believes in, which is that humans need to be wiped out and destroyed. So he could damage their reputation indefinitely by blowing up one more building. You know, and that's really what Doomsday was doing. Now, I want to be clear about one thing. I don't think that what I am doing with my Sonic series is what the official series should reflect. Hell no. Okay? I love political thrillers, I love dark movies, and I love character, but I don't think that this is what should be. That's not really my statement with making this series. I just love telling stories, and I thought that, okay, well, if I'm gonna make my own Sonic series, what am I gonna add differently than all the other people who make fan animated series? And the conclusion that I came to is like, well, what did I grow up watching? I grew up watching the Dark Knight trilogy. That had such an impact on me, and I definitely say that I'm inspired by his style, but I very much have a style of my own as well. And I think what I really wanted to do was tell a story that I would be interested in telling, and that I would be interested in watching myself. And the stories I like to tell and that I find interesting, as I've stated, are very dark. You know, I don't really like to tell stories that just match what has already been officially done. I think that is, like, as a fan, we have such creative freedom to sort of do whatever we want and add our own personal touch to it, and not worry about a bunch of executives saying, oh, you can't do that, oh, you can't say that, oh, you can't show that. You know, add your own personal touch to it. Don't just try to emulate whatever exists, you know, to a certain extent. You know, of course, you want to emulate the important things. You want it to feel like, well, maybe this could have happened in the official Sonic canon, but it's not obviously official. So it's a weird balance that I've been trying to find. I still haven't nailed it, I feel. I also hope to be doing this for as long as I can. I'm going to be making a couple more arcs, and also I'm going to be doing more singular episodes as well that are more self-contained and are shorter, but I have plenty more stories to tell, and this is just the beginning. And I think that Doomsday maybe was a little bit too dark, but when I was making that, you have to understand, I was in a dark time of my life. COVID had just started. I made what I made. And I look back at it now and I'm like, yeah, you know, maybe I did go a little too dark with it. Maybe it was a little too much. Maybe it did take itself a little bit too seriously. I can kind of get behind that, but at the same time, I still stand by it. I'm not going to remake Doomsday. I'm not going to take it down. It is what it is. That is the start of my series, and it will forever be known as that. And where all these stories since then have spawned from. I'm still proud of the work I've done, and it did take me a while to put that together. And it's not my best work, but I clearly have been getting better with it as time has gone on. So anyway, that's all I have to say in this video. I just wanted to state that I do miss the humans in Sonic games. I wish they would come back. Of course, not to the degree of being some political thriller like I'm doing with my series, but I do wish they were featured more in there to ground the stories that they have to tell. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. That's all I have for today. I'm going to be trying to make more videos where I just do discussions off the cuff. I don't script these videos, so bear with me if I'm stuttering and stumbling and saying a bunch of ums and uhs. I'm doing my best, and I just love storytelling, and I love these characters. I love this world, and I look forward to doing many more of these episodes and telling more stories. So thanks, and I'll see you in the next video.